Major John Rush, Empire of Ashes. New York City, winter 1992. Major John Rush stepped off the train at Penn Station with nothing but a worn duffel bag and the cold certainty that New York was rotting from the inside. He had come north because old ghosts refused to stay buried. A former Delta contact in Washington had passed him a file. The Gambino family was stronger than ever under John Gotti, the Teflon Don. The commission was fractured after the 1985 Sparks Steakhouse massacre, where Paul Castellano had been gunned down in the street like a dog. That hit, orchestrated with the help of Gotti's crew, had shattered the old rules. No more killing bosses in public. No more respecting the old ways. The mob had gone loud, flashy, and brutal. And the city let it happen. Politics, unions, construction, the docks, everything was rotten to the core. The Godfather had been fiction, but the reality was worse. Families like the Gambinos, Genovese, Lucchis, Bonanos, and Colombos had their hooks deep into the city's lifeblood. They controlled concrete, garbage, the Fulton Fish Market, and entire unions. Politicians looked the other way in exchange for campaign cash and votes. Even the FBI was playing games, some agents too scared, others too compromised. Rush checked into a quiet hotel in Midtown and began to dig. The dig. For 6 weeks, Rush moved like a shadow through New York. He met old contacts from his Vietnam days who had ended up in law enforcement or private security. He listened in dive bars in Bensonhurst and Bay Ridge. He watched John Gotti's swaggering court at the Rave Night Social Club. He followed the money through construction sites where Gambino-controlled companies charged double and delivered half. The deeper he went, the uglier it became. The Sparks Steakhouse hit in 1985 had been the beginning of the end of the old respect. Castellano, the boss of bosses, had been taken out in broad daylight while heading to dinner. Gotti, once Castellano's underboss, had risen by betraying the old man. Now Gotti paraded around in expensive suits, taunting the FBI with his media appearances. The family was making millions through extortion, heroin, and loan sharking, while politicians in Queens and Brooklyn took their cut. Rush uncovered ties that sickened even him. A senior city councilman was on the Gambino payroll. Union leaders delivered votes and muscle in exchange for no-show jobs. Construction projects across Manhattan were inflated by 30–40%. And in the shadows, the families were quietly preparing for the next war, because peace never lasted long in New York. One night in a smoky bar in Little Italy, an old wise guy who had survived the Castellano era pulled Rush aside. "You're digging too deep, soldier. These people own this city. Gotti thinks he's untouchable. The politicians are worse. They smile for the cameras while they sell the streets." Rush stared into his drink. Somebody has to remind them they're not. The message. Rush didn't go after Gotti directly. That would have been suicide. Instead, he targeted the machine that kept the Gambinos strong. He started with the enforcers responsible for the worst street-level terror, the ones who had carried out hits after the Sparks massacre and continued extorting small businesses. Over 3 brutal nights in January 1993, Rush moved through Queens and Brooklyn like the Reaper. 3 mid-level Gambino captains who had personally ordered the beating of store owners, and the trafficking of young women simply disappeared. One was found in a car trunk with clear evidence of his crimes pinned to his chest, a message for the family and the politicians who protected them. Rush fed detailed files, names, dates, bank records, and photographs to 2 honest FBI agents he trusted and a veteran reporter at the New York Times. The information was explosive. It linked Gambino operations directly to city contracts and political campaigns. The pressure began to build. John Gotti's empire, already under heavy federal scrutiny, started to crack. Several key captains were arrested. Politicians suddenly found themselves under investigation. The Teflon Don began to feel the heat that would eventually lead to his downfall. The final reckoning. On a cold February night, Rush confronted one of the last pieces of the puzzle, a corrupt city official who had taken millions in kickbacks while pretending to fight organized crime. The man begged in his expensive Upper East Side apartment. "You don't understand. They own everything. The families, the unions, the judges, it's all connected." Rush looked at him with dead eyes. "I understand perfectly. That's why I'm here." The official didn't survive the night. By the time Rush left New York 2 weeks later, the Gambino family was reeling. Several major players were behind bars. The political connections had been exposed enough to force real investigations. It wasn't the end. The mob never truly died, but it was a serious wound. Reflection on the train south. As the train carried him back toward Boston, Major John Rush stared out at the passing lights of New Jersey. He had seen The Godfather on screen years ago. Don Corleone had been a man of honor in his own twisted way. The reality of New York in the 90s was far uglier, flashy, greedy, and completely without honor. Politicians, cops, and mobsters all feeding at the same rotten trough while the city suffered. He lit a cigarette in the dim train car and allowed himself a small, cold smile. Some men needed to be put behind bars. Others needed to be put in the ground. And sometimes, when the system was too rotten to function, an old soldier had to remind everyone that justice still existed, even if it came at the end of a barrel. New York would never be clean. But for a little while, it was just a bit harder to be a monster.